Today, we talk about one of the savage wolves of the church. Can you spot the savage wolf in sheep's clothing? Of course not, because he looks just like a sheep. So, with popcorn and Coke Zero in hand, today we are going to do a reaction video to a closer look at Ron Wyatt's discovery of the Ark of the Covenant on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Now, we don't normally do the same person for a popcorn review twice. However, last year, in response to a question I received on Ron Wyatt, I posted a little short entitled, "Are any of Ron Wyatt's finds accepted by modern-day archaeologists?" Of course, the brief answer to this question was no. I published this short in August 28th, 2022, and it became my most watched video. The short has received over 800 comments, the most comments that any of my videos have received. And that is somewhat surprising, because no one has considered Ron Wyatt in serious Christian thought for decades. So why should anyone still care about Ron Wyatt's teachings? After all, he's been dead since 1999. Why does this video matter? The reasons are, 1. Because many people still believe Ron Wyatt was the greatest archaeologist ever. I wish that was an understatement. 2. Wyatt's teachings have gathered a cult-like following, and some people believe Wyatt was a prophet of God. 3. Small religious broadcasters are still airing Wyatt's documentaries. And 4. The internet has breathed new life into Wyatt's work, giving it a platform and growing a following that Wyatt never had even when he was alive. So this still matters even 20 years after Wyatt's death. And despite this upswing in people adopting Wyatt's views, what has been the response from the local church and from our Christian leaders, and even those who participated in promoting Wyatt in the first place? Well, nothing. And that's the problem. Christian leaders have chosen to remain quiet on this matter ever since the allegations of fraud against Wyatt first came out. They were happier to let the matter die quietly, neither disturbing their status nor their parishioners, than to admit any complicity in Wyatt's misdeeds. Our leaders have let the people continue to believe that everything Wyatt said was true, rather than having them come to terms with being deceived and finding the truth and working through their faith. It was professionally better for our leadership that the laity remain weak in faith than to become strong and less reliant upon the pastor. And for complete transparency, there was a time when I too was deceived by Ron Wyatt. This was long before I became an archaeologist myself. So I've been through this process of having to come to terms with being deceived. But through this process, I learned that there is solid archaeological information out there that supports the historicity of the Bible. And if, after watching this video, you still have questions about the reliability of the Bible, there is a lot of material out there on the internet, including hundreds of videos on this channel alone. So with that introduction out of the way, let's get into the background of the video and Ron Wyatt himself. Ron Wyatt was a nurse anesthesiologist, and as such, he probably had a baccalaureate in pre-med as he claimed, but had no other professional qualifications. In the 1980s and 1990s, many people became excited by the announcements that Ron Wyatt was making. Pastors were preaching Wyatt's claims from the pulpit, and he was even being featured on television, such as CBS's Morning News, as well as Christian television networks such as TBN and 3ABN. Wyatt also became known for bilking some of those TV networks out of tens of thousands of dollars, for example, 3ABN. But they weren't the only people Wyatt defrauded. He also bilked businessman Sam Martz out of $30,000. After Martz traveled with Wyatt and saw nothing that he was promised, Wyatt asked Martz for an additional $10,000. Martz agreed to give Wyatt the money, but only if he took and passed a polygraph test and signed a paper stating that Martz could do anything he wanted with the results. Quote, "The test showed that there was practically no truth in anything he, Wyatt, had said." Mary Irwin, The Unsolved Mysteries of Noah's Ark, Westbow Press, 2012, pages 47 to 48. The importance of the polygraph results is that it helps us to understand whether Wyatt was a liar or mentally ill. Polygraphs don't measure whether a statement is actually true or false. Instead, they measure physiological indicators that suggest whether the subject believes what is said to be true or not. In other words, did Wyatt have a guilty mind when he said what he did? On the other hand, mental illness can taint the results of a polygraph because those with delusions believe their delusions are true. Those who are delusional aren't lying, but are simply wrong. And while it is impolitic in our culture today to label anyone a liar, stretching the benefit of the doubt beyond all credulity, the fact that Wyatt failed his polygraph strongly indicates his proclivity towards telling fibs that he knew were fibs. Following Wyatt's death in 1999, most Christian intellectuals, including organizations such as Answers in Genesis, had come to the conclusion that there was nothing to Wyatt's claims. And those who had preached about Wyatt's claims simply let the matter drop with no further comment, leaving us with their debt to the truth. And today, we itemize that debt in a video from the Wyatt Archaeological Museum that is a year 2000 retrospective of Wyatt's, quote, discovery, end quote, of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this is admittedly an old video, but it is also an important video because it concerns one of Wyatt's cornerstone claims, the supposed discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I want to be clear that Ron Wyatt is not just your everyday huckster, raconteur, or even a swashbuckling Indiana Jones type treasure hunter. He claimed to have received divine revelations from angels and from God. He is in effect claiming the status of a prophet. That puts him in a different category than a mere field archaeologist. And as such, he must be judged as one who claims to be a prophet. Likewise, people have responded to him as if he were a prophet. Here is some of the mail I have received. This guy is going to hell. Stop lying about Ron Wyatt. I will tell you because God used Ron Wyatt to reveal these archaeological treasures at this time, the end time, so that those who need physical evidence to help their faith can have it. And being stubborn in denying this evidence is going against God, just like the ancient Jewish leaders who, having in front of them the Messiah in person, denied him, thinking they were honoring God. Ron claimed that angels told him the Ark of the Covenant will be revealed after a new set of man's commandments that would have to be followed were established. COP27 laid down the 10 Commandments of climate change repentance. Will we be required to obey those commandments or have our right taken away to buy and sell after the central bank digital currency comes online? I think Ron may have given us a prophetic warning. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is growing acceptance of Ron Wyatt as a prophet. And as such, we are not dealing with an academic question, but a religious question about a cultist that has gathered around Ron Wyatt's claims. What we need to determine at this point is whether this cultist is Christian or non-Christian. To be perfectly blunt, I am not hating on Ron Wyatt because I'm jealous or because I think it's humorous to do so. I think this is really serious. And I'm doing this because Ron Wyatt has destroyed people's faith. Sure, some people came to faith because of him. But what kind of faith is he promoting? That might not be what you think it is. And what happens when he is shown to be a charlatan to those with a weaker faith? These people almost instantly flip to atheism. Ron Wyatt has bred atheists. This is just one reason why what he does is so dangerous. So that covers why I'm doing this popcorn review. But I also think it is important to cover who I am when I critique this video, because many will knee-jerk and say that I'm an atheist and an unbeliever when I am neither. I am a believer in the historic Christian faith and am a biblical maximalist, which means that I believe that the Bible is largely historic. Furthermore, I hold 5 academic degrees. I hold master's degrees in biblical archaeology and divinity, and my PhD is in Egyptology. So I am well versed in evaluating archaeological claims. Now, suffice it to say that I think there is really good and solid evidence for the Bible. But Ron Wyatt introduced ridiculous claims that held the Bible up to ridicule. Those claims need to be challenged and debunked, lest the critic think that all Christians are gullible and foolish. The overriding principle here is that judgment begins with the house of God, 1 Peter 4:17. So with all that said, let's get into the video, a closer look at Ron Wyatt's discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. We're going to bypass the opening matter and get into the meat of the video.
Hi, I'm Ron Wyatt. Welcome to the Ark of the Covenant dig. We've been working in this area since 1979, and shall we say it hasn't been an easy job. In 1982 we were able to get into the chamber where we saw some of the furnishings from the first temple. Now we accomplished that by going down through this hole here that's about 40 foot deep, and then coming out of there back up into a chimney in spelunker terminology, and then squeezing on into the chamber.
Okay, Ron was given permission to dig at this site by the Garden Tomb Trust, who carefully monitored the activities of Wyatt's excavations. This is not an Israel Antiquities Authority sanctioned dig. It was a private excavation done on private property that was outside of what was considered a site of archaeological significance. The Wyatt Group has produced no evidence at all that anything was found down that tunnel, and even the Garden Tomb Trust admits that nothing was found down in those tunnels. And the curator of the site said that, quote, Ron Wyatt is persona non grata here, end quote. Irwin, page 44.
We broke our way in through a hole. We went 60 feet underground. We came back up. I mean, it was a real labyrinth. But once you got in this chamber, there sat a door.
Did the Wyatt team take any photographs of this door? A door at the bottom of a deep tunnel would all by itself have been a huge archaeological find. Doors can tell you so much about the cultural context and material culture. And Wyatt did nothing to document that in the slightest? Are you kidding me? Doors are big finds in archaeology, and Wyatt neither documents nor preserves the door in any way. The cavalier way Wyatt addresses this makes me think that there was no door at all.
Right at the end of the chamber. And the people that brought this thing in busted a chunk of stone loose, dug out from behind it, laid it down, cut a doorway out in there, carried this stuff in.
If there's a door, why didn't you just open it? You had to cut a doorway through the stone? Was there a door or was there not a door?
And then they covered them with animal skins, and then they covered them with wooden boards, and then stones. They packed that thing full of stones, backed out and shoved that chunk of rock back in place and filled in behind it. And today, from the outside, it just looks like a crack that an earthquake made, and there's a lot of those in that scarp.
Now, if it were just simply getting into the chamber, we could do that. But once we get in there, we have to have the ability to get all of those things out of that chamber and safely to the surface.
When Howard Carter first entered the tomb of King Tutankhamun, the first thing he did was take photographs. Lots and lots of photographs. Carter even took photographs of the door and the seal on the door. Ron Wyatt enters what is potentially the most important archaeological site ever and takes no photographs at all.
So it's not like just treasure hunting where you go in and get whatever is there and take it out. We have to consider taking care of the objects that are beyond this wall. And we're bringing the radar scanning equipment out of the hotel here.
That's right, and take about a minute for the scan. All right.
Tell them to start.
Okay, I'm going to admit that this just seems strange to me. Ground-penetrating radar units from the 1980s and early 1990s were used primarily for soil analysis and detecting bedrock. These early units did not operate at multiple frequencies, but instead, you had to buy specialized antennas for each particular use and frequency you wanted to test at. Penetrating stone requires a very low frequency, which back then was not commonly available and would have been specialized equipment. I am presuming that they are trying to find cavities on the other side of perhaps 20 or 30 meters of rock. But it seems doubtful that their equipment was suitable for that task.
You can see the excavation site's kind of hid by these bushes, so a lot of people, as they walk along this path, don't necessarily see it, but sometimes they'll hear the noise.
Now, I think these must be cracks in the rocks. These little white lines going through there must be cracks or something. From here to here, the transducer is stationary, because it's all the same all the way down. And it looks like there's a cavern there, which I don't know what scale you had it on, so you can work.
I don't know how they can deduce that there's a cavern from that, but hey, if they can find something with that or a Ouija board, who am I to say? Nevertheless, this doesn't seem very scientific to me.
Work out how deep it is from the surface, or from where the transducer is to the cavern, if you know what scale and you've calibrated to that scale.
This is what, 40 feet down?
Roughly, yeah.
44 feet down?
Old wall we found. Old digging down.
An old boiler.
And then the hole keeps going down about how far, Simon?
That's another 10 feet down there.
10 feet down to Ron down the bottom.
He's found it really
On the end of the jackhammer.
about to, contemplating.
Just
All right, at this point, you are 45 feet under the ground. All of the debris above us is from the many different destruction levels of Jerusalem. In antiquity, when a city got destroyed, instead of coming back, moving all the debris away, and starting from bedrock, they would just level off what was left of the city and start it from that point on up. And Jerusalem has been destroyed at least 10 times throughout antiquity. And we are down at, right here is the pre-Babylonian area, or strata. Now,
What? Destruction layers of Jerusalem at the Garden Tomb? Huh? The boundaries of Jerusalem never extended to the Garden Tomb until modern times. Wyatt knows nothing about stratigraphy or the history of Jerusalem, or for that matter, the Garden Tomb. Wyatt is burrowing under the rock of an escarpment. And an escarpment is a giant, basically a huge rock face, and he's burrowing underneath that rock face. So I don't know how there can be an occupation or destruction layers under an escarpment. This seems complete nonsense to me.
what I wanted to point out to you here is in front of me you see some large stones that are blocking an entrance into a chamber.
Stones blocking an entrance into a chamber. I see large boulders, but that doesn't mean that these lead into a chamber. It looks to me that this is Wyatt playing to the cameras more than he's finding anything real.
Now, in order to conceal the chamber, they couldn't just block the chamber entrance itself. Otherwise, this would call attention to it. So they put up a veneer that went around the escarpment some distance, and this would at least confuse anybody that was looking for an entrance and perhaps make them believe that the stone veneer was there for some other reason.
Oh, big boulders weren't enough. They had to put a veneer of rocks around that to confuse people. I can't believe anyone ever bought this garbage.
Now, in this particular quarry and in many others from antiquity, they would cut the stone back until they came to chambers, or where the water had eroded and dissolved the stone away. This type material was unusable for their purposes in cutting out good strong blocks of stone for building purposes. So when they cut into these chambers, they would go around and leave a thin wall between the chamber and the outside, taking all of the good stone away. So this is a situation that we're looking at here and that we have looked at in several other.
This is, of course, nonsense. That might be true if we were talking about a stone quarry, but the Garden Tomb was never a quarry. The site was just never used in that way.
Other areas in this particular cave complex. Now, this wall here was put up very hastily. They have had mortar.
That's a wall? How does he know that's a wall? That just looks like rock boulders to me. This reminds me of a story I heard when I was at a dinner with other archaeologists. As we were dining, a couple of Mycenaean archaeologists told me about a certain Greek archaeologist. She was so passionate and cared so much for her field crew that they didn't want to let her down. They didn't want to disappoint her. So her field crew dug away the dirt and stone in such a way that it looked like there was a wall there. She was convinced that she had discovered a wall, but she had not discovered a wall. And in similar fashion, neither had Ron Wyatt.
Back to Babylonian and pre-Babylonian times. And this wall, as you will see, instead of mortar, they used some red clay. Now this...
Good grief. Red clay was not used for mortar. The Judean foothills are replete with an iron-rich red soil that is ubiquitous in the region. The Judeans had plenty of access to lime mortar that was many times stronger than unfired clay. This is just silly.
This tells us that they did all of this in quite a hurry. So given all of this information and the fact that I was in a chamber in this general location, however, it is a little confusing once you crawl around through these tunnels to try to keep oriented if you don't have a compass on you. But our radar, our subsurface interface radar scanner shows that there is a chamber approximately 18 inches behind this wall. And one of the shots that we got from the side showed a level of contents in the chamber with lessened contents near the bottom. And in...
Wait a minute. Hadn't Wyatt already discovered the Ark and other furniture at this point? Why are they looking for another chamber? This doesn't make any sense.
Experimentation, we find that this usually represents something that's standing on legs or up on some sort of a pedestal. We're going to attempt to put a hole through there with this drill.
Best archaeologist ever. Wow. Taking in pneumatic hammer drills and jackhammers. That's the sort of archaeology that only Rick O'Connell from The Mummy would think of. Oh boy. Real archaeology is done with fine instruments. If you've encountered what you think is a large wall and need to get to the other side of it, then you've done something wrong. Even if you have to remove a large stone like this, these are certainly the wrong tools for a situation like this, since it would likely result in a tunnel collapse.
All right, now, as we were down here with a lot of debris over us, quite enough to bury us, and some future archaeologist, if time lasts long enough, would find our remains, that is too much vibration down in this area and would trigger earth slides, which we have experienced several of. So,
You can see this is teensy. This is frightening.
It's like you said, the only thing really holding this.
Take a good look. This just caved in a little bit earlier, and that's why they had to put these boards up. Behind, I don't know if you can see, there's nothing. There's the air hose. There's Frank laying the drill down. And I am going to very carefully try to scoot down a little at a time. Oh. You can see it's straight down. There's Frank with a bucket of rocks.
Wow, that is a hodgepodge of tunnel supports. Frankly, I'm surprised no one was killed in this irresponsible operation.
Can you see the full depth of it over there where Bob is? Pretty far down in there.
There's
About another
Bob.
4 feet.
What is he doing down there, Frank?
He's cleaning off, we hope, right to his right-hand side. The face of the cliff goes straight down, and we're hoping that that will be the chamber to the right if we can find our way into it through solid rock right there.
Wow.
Can't see it too well from where you're at, but it's been planed straight down. Over here to my left is where we had the cave in, where all this is missing.
Right there. I don't know if this is recording very well or not. It looks like I'm fogged up, but you can see I am in a very confined space. And these guys have been working in here non-stop, day after day.
Probably try to find the entrance. Just to use a jackhammer with all this loose material would be almost impossible. We've already had one cave in.
Yeah.
So we'll have to go for finding some way into it, if we can, like a door or some kind of an entrance.
Hard to believe. Okay. I think I probably better call it quits and back up behind me and exit so they can get someone in here to...
Okay. Did you see the wall and all that?
Well, yeah, I didn't go, very far.
Yeah.
I just went down to about there.
Okay. But you did see the wall.
Yeah. You can see how small that hole is. I don't know how to get in there. I could hardly get in there. There's the air hose, which doubles as the communications line. I'll show you this whole chamber. At times there would be, how many men in here, Dale, at one time? Seven or eight. Now I'm looking straight up now.
7 or 8 men in a space that small would be an OSHA violation in the United States. This may have been a private excavation on private property, but it was also crazy unsafe.
Straight down. Now, right over here, you can see Golgotha. Skull Hill. There's Skull Hill. And you come along here, where the wall is, down to where the excavation is, which is right there. We're looking right into the area that it is, right there. It's where Christ was actually crucified.
Now we are told that Joseph of Arimathea took the body of Christ and laid it in a tomb that had never been used. If this was the Golgotha, which was used as a normative execution site by the Romans, the chance that an unused tomb was located so close to the execution site would have been exceedingly small. Moreover, the Garden Tomb site actually dates to the 7th or 8th centuries BC, so there is good reason to doubt that claim.
Well, what I discovered when I started excavating down that cliff wall, first of all, I discovered the cutouts in the wall of the cliff where they had posted the signs.
We painted or drew Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in the Roman and the Greek and the Hebrew languages, and we put them there, and we set this up to resemble what happened to Christ on the cross. Okay. Now the cross hole is actually right straight down below where we set this thing up.
Okay, notice the archival footage used here. Wyatt is claiming that he discovered the alcoves used to post the signs where it stated that Jesus was the King of the Jews. Wyatt is clearly leveraging upon the fact that locals had used the alcoves for signage. So, on the one hand, in what way is this a discovery? On the other hand, John 19:19 states that the charge that, quote, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews, end quote, was nailed to the cross, not placed in an alcove. John was literally there at the foot of the cross. If anyone knows what happened there, it was him. So Wyatt is wrong about the idea that the charges were placed upon alcoves when they were in fact nailed upon the crosses themselves.
Straight down below where we set this thing up. And of course,
So essentially, Ron Wyatt has added his interpretation to the local context. Wyatt has created a diorama that is an alternative history based upon his private interpretation of the biblical text. The peril of this is that an interpretation with no historic or scholastic basis is being asserted as being the true account when the evidence is really not there. As far as the quote, cross hole is concerned, nobody knows if that is actually a cross hole. It's just a hole in the ground. And people dug holes in the ground for multiple reasons. And furthermore, there is no way to date a hole. Wyatt is piling presuppositions on top of presuppositions to support his theories.
And then out from that is a first century Christian church, and the massive 13-foot 2-inch stone that sealed the sepulchre that Christ was buried in is affixed into the wall of that first century church that's buried on this site.
The round stone shown here is not really there. Wyatt's special effects team have added that stone when there is no evidence that a large rolling stone was ever there to begin with.
And this then is the Calvary Scarp, or escarpment, the place outside the city on the north side where most of the traffic passed through that criminals were executed.
What an enormous amount of work this was, and the tremendous difficulties involved. The maze of tunnels seemed endless, as did the many tons of rock and rubble that was removed over the years of work there. He didn't confine his search for the tunnel to the cave system. He believed for various reasons that it most likely...
Wyatt claimed he went into the chamber of the Ark of the Covenant, dug tunnel after tunnel for years, and literally produced no evidence at all. And frankly, the lip at the base of the trough in front of the door to the garden tomb is insufficient to retain a large rolling stone. Similar tombs that had large rolling stones also had very, very large stone abutments to hold the stone in place as it rolled. This is absent at the garden tomb.
Had its beginning in Zedekiah's cave, the huge ancient quarry underneath the old city, carved out of the southern portion of Mount Moriah. He found a tunnel entrance sealed with blocks which appeared to be heading in the correct direction.
Now there's two things that are immediately apparent. One is from the color of that rock. This is the old water channel. Also that you're looking at almost a 6-foot hole there that's been plugged with those rocks. And it's aimed exactly in the direction that our excavation across the street is located in. Now here's another thing that wasn't noticed. This rock right immediately to your left is part of a wall. Is right here. See, that stone, that stone, that stone, another stone below it. So this was double sealed. And whoever explored the cave in recent times broke through this one, but then they did not break through that second one. And we can assume that there's maybe some more baffles or blocked areas farther back.
Upon opening it,
This is not a wall, it's a forgery, and this is how I know. Notice the middle right stone. First, it looks whiter than the surrounding stone. This indicates that the surface patina of the stone has been removed recently. No limestone looks that white when the surrounding limestone borders have an unmistakable patina. Second, the stone has been beveled in such a way that is uncharacteristic of ancient stone cutting in Israel. Particularly, take note that the beveling is far away from the edge of the quote stone. This shows that the stone was cut in situ, or its current context. In other words, somebody cut this rock after it was already in its present position. It is also very strange that the one stone was beveled, but none of the other stones. Third, if you look carefully, you will notice that the middle stone is actually one piece with the stone beneath it. And the gray texture of the stone is probably the original patina. There is no clear dividing line between the lower and middle stone. This has all the signs that the middle stone was recently made to look like a stone wall. This is dishonest, fraudulent, and very obvious.
Water channel. Also, that you're looking at almost a 6-foot hole there that's been plugged with those rocks. And it's aimed exactly in the direction that our excavation across the street is located in. Now here's another thing that wasn't noticed. This rock right immediately to your left is part of a wall. Is right here. See that stone, that stone, that stone, another stone below it. So this was double sealed. And whoever explored the cave in recent times broke through this one, but then they did not break through that second one. And we can assume that there's maybe some more baffles or blocked areas farther back.
Upon opening it, he resealed it. It was not the tunnel he was looking for.
Okay, after all that, the quote wall turned out to not be the tunnel he was looking for, and it also was not the entrance to a chamber. Therefore, it was nothing at all except bait and switch. This is classic Ron Wyatt modus operandi. He would bait you with something tantalizing, often planted, then switch it out by saying, quote, "That's not what we are looking for," end quote. And then he would throw out the next piece of bait. This is how he strung his marks along, and it is a classic tactic of con men.
Each time Ron and his crew excavated, the entrance to the cave system had to be refilled and the area completely cleaned up before they left. This was a tremendous task, as was reopening it each time they returned. So Ron finally installed a steel door, which could be easily covered and uncovered with dirt and gravel, yet it allowed easy entrance. It also allowed him the ability to enter the system alone without a crew.
In other words, Wyatt installed a steel cellar door, an item that is commonly available at hardware stores across Israel. Color me unimpressed.
This same trip, he and the crew built a beautiful retaining wall around the area of ground directly below the cutouts or niches and above the cross holes.
Getting a little look at our fancy stonework.
Ron continued to persist and spent every spare moment and every spare dime in his search for the tunnel. Perhaps it was inevitable that the day would come when he became discouraged. Someone uninvited showed up when he arrived to resume work there. In the following, as Ron relates what happened next, the camera battery died unexpectedly, which is why it is edited.
Someone mysteriously shows up unexpectedly, and suddenly the camera battery died. So there is no recording, just Wyatt's recollection of the events. How convenient.
And when I arrived at the Jerusalem Hotel, sitting on the front stoop was this medical doctor who said, "Ron, I'm here to help you." Well, bless his heart, he hadn't asked my permission or anything, said nothing, he just popped up. Well, that makes me rather unlikely to give him the combination to the vault, if you know what I mean. And so, anyway, I was convinced that one of my dumb mistakes had been too many, and that God couldn't use me anymore. So he'd sent this fellow there so I couldn't work on the Ark of the Covenant. And he would have had to share my experiences in order to know what a crushing blow that was. See, I know I'm unworthy. And I thought, okay, finally you messed up, and you're out of it. I said a little prayer. I said, Lord, I'm sorry. If there's anything I can help, whoever you want to finish the job, just let me know and I'll do what I can. Well, I couldn't work on the Ark of the Covenant with that guy around, so we volunteered to clean the garden tomb. In the back part of it, there was about 100 years worth of garbage and one thing and another that had just been thrown back there over the years. So we hauled out of there something like 20 big truckloads of trash. And it was hot that September, blistering hot. And I had gotten a little fan to get some air stirring, and the fan died. Well, added on the rest of my miseries, that was almost too much. You know, you remember the story of Jonah and his gourd vine? I could sympathize with him at that point in time. Anyway, I told everybody else, I said, look, just find you a shade somewhere and eat your lunches. And I'll try to fix the fan. So I just sat down on the sidewalk. Anyway, I was sitting down there working on this fan. And a voice said to me,
God bless you and what you're doing here. So I looked up, and this being was up on this landing, the top of those stairs. Looked exactly like I figured Christ would have looked. And the outfit that he had on was not exactly like the Muslims wear today, but it was closer to that than it was anything else I had seen. So I said, are you from around here, sir? And he said, no. And I said, well, then you're a tourist. And he said, no. And I thought, well, he doesn't want to talk with me. Obviously, I didn't know what else to say. And then he said, I'm on my way from South Africa to the New Jerusalem.
well, that certainly eliminated a whole lot of possibilities there. Immediately that proved that he was a heavenly being. And I just sat there, didn't say anything, and he looked at, just continued to look at me. He said, God bless you. And what you're doing here. He was at the top of those stairs. And he walked right back that little short sidewalk, took a right at that big pine tree, and headed for the front gate. Well, this doctor of all people was the only one in earshot. And he was back under some shrubs in the shade eating his lunch, and he piped up and he said, Ron, do you suppose we've been talking with an angel? And I said, at least. Well, I worked with great enthusiasm for the rest of that day. When we left the garden tomb, I asked the ladies in there, I said, what did you think of that big, tall man dressed in ancient Jewish garb? And they looked at me kind of funny. And they said, there's been nobody in here like that today. And then one of them said, well, Mr. Wyatt, there's never been anybody in here like that. So somewhere between where he turned right past that pine tree and before he got to the office, he went on to the New Jerusalem.
The uninvited.
Wyatt here is reporting an angelic visit to his dig. This is a religious claim that goes above and beyond his archaeological claims. However, given the lack of veracity of his archaeological claims, this does cast doubt upon his claims of being visited by angels.
At this time, Ron made the following discovery.
Just a brief look around the surrounding areas here to identify the location of this site. Down to the left, of course, is down where the work's being done in the excavation. As you hear the electric jackhammer, we have been probing around up here by the cross hole, and just immediately to the left of the film container, you see some dark pigmented material. Now this appears to be dried blood.
This is not dried blood. Israel is known for its iron-rich red soils. Much of the fertility of the soil in the region is caused by these rust and red-colored soils. And that soil is everywhere in the Judean foothills. How can Wyatt possibly tell the difference between dried blood and the rust-colored soil? In effect, you can't. They are very, very similar in color. So he's not finding blood here, he's finding dirt.
But we do plan to put some of this in the film case and take it back and have it analyzed to see if it is blood. Now this is right under the cutouts where Christ was crucified and near the cross hole that we believe to be the one he was crucified on. There, right at the very tip of the tab, there's some more of this real dark material. As soon as it's exposed to the light, it begins to turn a lighter brown. And this is typical of very old blood. So we'll take some more of this sample here. And it seems to have come down through this area here, as we've collected it all the way along and down into this crevice that communicates with the chamber that the Ark of the Covenant's in. It comes right down through here and down this way and around through a crack right in here and down through this area. Anyway, I have several samples of it that I have taken.
Cross-contamination. Wyatt used a soda can tab and a camera film container to collect the samples. As soon as someone touched the soda can with their lips, that soda can tab is now contaminated with human DNA from saliva, which also contains white blood cells. Wyatt also used his bare hands to collect the samples, which are now contaminated with skin cells. Wyatt, if he found any DNA at all, did not find the DNA of Jesus Christ, but of Ron Wyatt.
For many years, the specimen sat untouched. Then, in 1996, when Ron was in Great Britain, Richard and Elizabeth Reeves and their sons came to Nashville to our home. Richard had a new, unique, and very powerful microscope he wanted to show us.
Leviticus 17:14 informs us that the life of all flesh is the blood thereof. Once again, scientists are finding out that the truths of Scripture are far more literal than they ever imagined. Tiny particles have been discovered in blood that are seemingly indestructible. These tiny particles are less than a tenth of a micron in size, and while they cannot be seen using standard medical microscopes, new methods of microscopy have been developed, which makes it possible to see them in their living state. The French scientist Gaston Naessens designed...
Okay, Gaston Naessens was a pseudoscientist. While he claimed to be a biologist, the university he said he studied at cannot find a degree for him in biology. He was convicted in France in 1956 of practicing medicine without a license. Naessens developed a high magnification microscope as a means of promoting his somatid theory of biology. The somatid theory of biology is a now discredited idea that every cell contains tiny, autonomous, self-propelled, self-reproducing particles of living matter which cause sickness. The microscope he developed would be generally classified as a reflectance microscope, and it had a greater magnification than the typical transmission microscope, about 30,000 times versus 2,000 times. However, it never caught on with the medical community because it was developed about 20 years after the electron microscope, which has an effective magnification range of 1x to 50 million times. In effect, Naessens had developed technology that was already obsolete.
special microscope components that would allow him to see these particles which he entitles somatids, meaning the body that creates. Through experimentation, Professor Nasons found that these somatids contain genetic material yet to be fully understood by the scientific community. They are
This is just pseudoscientific hogwash. There is no evidence that somatids exist. Biologists have been using the electron microscope since the 1930s. Researchers have found all sorts of biological structures inside the cell, but not somatids.
polymorphic in nature, growing from stage to stage, and are unaffected by high temperatures, extremely toxic chemicals, or even nuclear radiation. Professor Nasons believes these somatids to be subcellular living and reproducing entities, the precursor of DNA, and that they may be the building blocks of life. About 6 years ago, I learned about these particles as a result of some research that I was conducting, which was totally non-related to archaeology. At that time, I was using a standard medical microscope, and while I could not see these particles, I knew they had to be there. I began to develop my own microscope patterned after the design of Professor Nasons. What you see behind me is that microscope in its latest stage of development. The microscope employs an extremely bright xenon or mercury light source, which can be combined with tungsten light. The light is directed across the microscopic specimen rather than on or through it in what is known as a dark field configuration. The light reflecting off the object is transmitted through the microscope and is magnified over 1,000 times. The image is then captured by a sensitive CCD camera and transmitted to a monitor for viewing at screen magnifications of up to 30,000x. Under these conditions, the tiny living particles can plainly be seen against a dark background. In 1996, my family and I made a trip to Nashville to visit the Wyatts. I brought along the microscope, which at that time was somewhat portable in its early stage of development, and set it up in the basement of the Wyatt's house. One evening, Mary Nell Wyatt asked me to take a look at some material from a burial cave to see if these tiny particles were present. Without my knowledge, one of the samples was actually the blood sample that Ron had taken from the Ark of the Covenant dig. The sample was placed under the microscope, and as the specimen began to come into focus, thousands of tiny particles, somatids if you will, became plainly visible. At that time, Mary Nell, who was standing behind me, began to weep. As I turned around and saw the expression on her face, I realized immediately that the sample we were looking at was actually the sample that Ron had found to be the blood of Christ. Okay, Mary Nell's going to take the sample and mix it with sterile water. And a test tube there that we've...
And to prepare the sample, Mary Nell uses her bare fingers. Oh, this is so scientific. This sample is just contaminated right out of the gate. I mean, if it wasn't contaminated with Ron collecting it with his bare hands, it's now contaminated by Mary Nell's greasy fingers.
That'll be enough. And she's going to take some sterile water. And
Why bother with sterile water? The sample is already completely contaminated. You might as well use tap water at this point.
a little bit. Just some drops, all we need right now. Okay, so now that we've got the sample on the slide, we'll go ahead and focus into the sample and see what comes up on the screen here. And there they are, thousands of living particles.
Those aren't living particles. Congratulations, you have just observed Brownian motion. This is one of the reasons why high magnification light telescopes are not used in medical laboratories. After you get down to a certain magnification, it becomes a matter of diminishing returns. What you are seeing is producing less and less useful information, while the observation of Brownian motion increases. By the way, Brownian motion has been observed using normal light microscopes since 1827. It's not a new effect.
Less than a quarter of a micron in size. The spores are maybe a half micron, and but most of those little particles you're looking at is 17,000 X, magnified on the screen 17,000 times. You know, in the Bible it tells us that the life is in the blood, and there's little living particles that most people are unaware that are there. And this is the same thing we see in living blood. The scientist in Canada says that these things never die. The blood may dry up, but these things, he says, they're indestructible, and he says they are the basis of life.
All this is just pure nonsense. This contradicts practically everything we know about modern human biology.
The results we obtained in no way can be said to be proof that the specimen was the blood of Christ, but based on the location from which the specimen came.
It's not proof, it's not even evidence, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing.
We believe it was what Ron believed it was. Years earlier, Ron had taken a blood specimen from the lid of the case which contained the Ark of the Covenant.
The blood of Christ is only dried out, folks. It's not dead. When we rehydrated it with normal saline, 72 hours of body temperature with slight, very gentle swirling, and put the white blood cells in a growth medium, 48 hours later, we did a chromosome count. I didn't. This was in Israel.
Those results were never released. Wyatt never mentions which lab he used, and no lab has stepped up and claimed responsibility for doing the testing. We have nothing but Wyatt's say-so that such testing was ever done.
It has 24 chromosomes only. All of us here have 46. Unless, there's a couple of genetic anomalies that make that different. But Christ received 23 from his mother and one Y, sex determining factor, from his father, who was not a human father.
This is just plain bizarre. A true human has 46 chromosomes. If Christ had only 24 chromosomes, he would be a haploid organism. Haploid organisms look very different from their diploid counterparts. Such a genetic complement would result in massive deformities in humans that would have invariably resulted in death. Furthermore, this contradicts biblical revelation itself, which states Christ was fully man and fully God. Moreover, Hebrews 2 states, quote, "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil. For this reason, he had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people." Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 17. If Christ was not made like us in every way, he cannot act as an atonement for our sins. If he did not have 46 chromosomes, he would not be fully man, and therefore we would still be dead in our sins. So, despite the fact that Christ was born from a virgin, he would still have a normal human genetics. How God exactly did this, we aren't told. But it's part of the miracle and mystery of the virgin conception. Nevertheless, the denial of Christ's full humanity is heresy.
Because had he received that from a human father, it would have been accompanied by 22 autosomes. Now what this basically means is that his height, his eye color, his hair color, and all of this was supplied from the genes of his mother's gene pool. However, Mary and Joseph both descended from David, but none of us have 24 chromosomes.
That's correct. None of us have 24 chromosomes, because if we did, we would be dead.
Well, they knew. They told me before when I asked them to perform this investigation, that dry blood, you can't get a chromosome count on it because the white blood cells have to be alive in order to do that. You can get DNA, you can get some other things, but you can't get a chromosome count. So this blood is unique, and it is Christ's blood.
Who is this they? Wyatt never mentions who did this testing and what lab did this test result. All we have is Ron's say-so that such tests were done.
With no explanations from Ron, the excavation suddenly came to a stop. On a later trip to Jerusalem, Ron entered the cave system alone through the middle door, and for the first time in quite a while he re-entered the chamber with the Ark of the Covenant. To his utter surprise,
So Ron enters the chamber with the Ark of the Covenant several times. The custodians of the garden tomb have said that nothing came of Ron's digs. No chambers, nothing. But more mysterious is that Ron claims that photographic film didn't work. But if that was true, why didn't he at least bring a sketch pad and a pencil? Are you telling me that pencils malfunctioned in the presence of the Ark? He claims to have seen the Ark, but there isn't one decent pencil sketch of it? No detailed descriptions of any of the iconography on the Ark? This is an alarming absence of details that suggests fraud more than a find.
and disbelief, he found the chamber had been completely cleaned out and all the items from the temple were set up. No longer was the Ark in the stone case.
Okay, here we have a photo montage of the people who participated in the dig, while Mary Nell tells you about how the furnishings were now moved around the chamber and set up as they would have been in the temple. This is to give you the impression that a lot of people witnessed Ron's discoveries and could verify Ron's finds. The truth is that only one person ever supposedly saw the Ark, and that was Ron alone.
The chamber where I found the Ark of the Covenant has since been perfectly cleaned out. And the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the candlestick, the golden altar of incense, they're all set out as they were in the earthly temple, except that the Ark of the Covenant is setting against the 12-foot long and 18-foot wide or high wall.
He found the original tunnel was also cleaned out, and he followed it to discover that it did indeed open into Zedekiah's cave. It was not the tunnel he and his crew had opened earlier. In the following years, Ron entered the chamber with the Ark a number of times.
Yes, the tables of stone were found in the Ark of the Covenant. I removed them with the assistance of 4 angels who lifted the mercy seat, which I would estimate weighs about 900 pounds of solid gold.
Okay, this is pure fantasy. Why would 4 angels be needed to lift the mercy seat? Well, because Ron apparently misunderstands what the biblical text reads in Exodus 25:17. The text reads, quote, "And you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide." At issue here is the meaning of the words pure gold. The Hebrew word for pure here is tahor. The first possible meaning is that the gold was 24 karat pure gold without impurities at all, such as silver or copper. However, gold above 90% purity was exceptionally rare in the late Bronze Age, because the primary means of refining was cupellation, a process where gold was mixed with lead and heated to separate out other non-precious metals. As such, the purity of gold alloys was all over the place in the late Bronze Age. So This is an unlikely meaning for tahor. The next and most likely understanding is that tahor means pure in the ritual sense. Halot, the most comprehensive Hebrew dictionary, defines tahor to mean pure or ceremonially clean. That is to say that this gold had not been used to create any sort of idol. Exodus 25:18 tells us that the cherubim on the mercy seat were made of hammered work, that is, gold forming. These items were not created by purifying the gold in a fire first, so the gold had to be ritually pure before being used on the ark. This is the most plausible meaning for pure gold, which is, in this context, means ritually pure. However, Ron assumes a completely different meaning for pure gold. That is, the pure here means solid, as in, quote, make a mercy seat of solid gold, end quote. Yet, this is not part of the semantic range of tahor, but this is how Ron gets his estimate that the mercy seat weighs 900 pounds of solid gold. Suffice it to say that this is a problematic interpretation. One problem is that the pole rings were attached to the feet of the ark, and therefore the center of gravity would ride as high as the lid itself, making the ark extremely difficult to move without tipping it. After all, at 900 pounds, the mercy seat would weigh many times more than the 2 stone tablets. Furthermore, the ark was carried from place to place over long distance by human porters carrying the ark by its poles. If the mercy seat alone weighed 900 pounds, you would need about 24 people to carry the ark. The other problem is that the quote, pure gold is used elsewhere in the text where it clearly cannot mean solid gold, such as in Exodus 25:10 through 11. So Ron's understanding of this verse cannot be correct, and therefore his vision also cannot be true.
And one of these angels told me to take the tables of stone out of there. He said God wants everyone to see those. And so I took them out, backed up, stood there, frozen in place, and I just can't describe my physical state or mental state or anything else. If I didn't have some physical evidence to prove it happened, I think I had a dream or something. But anyway, they're on a stone ledge right.
The angels told Ron to take the tablets of the stone out of the ark because, quote, God wants everyone to see those, end quote. Okay, Ron. God wants everyone to see the tablets of stone. So where are they? You didn't disobey God by not showing the tablets that, by God's command, everyone was supposed to see, did you? And where is that physical evidence that Ron keeps telling us about, which proves this actually happened? The fact is there's no evidence. Nada. Zilch. Nothing. Again, all we have is Ron's word for any of this.
In the same chamber, that's where the angel put them after I handed them to him. I didn't know what to do with them. And I was told that these are to be presented with the blood evidence when the mark of the beast law is passed or enforced.
So the tablets are to be presented with the blood evidence when the law of the mark of the beast is passed or enforced. Ron Wyatt here is injecting himself into the drama of end-time prophecy and claiming this is angelic revelation. There is no mention of a, quote, mark of the beast law, end quote, in the book of Revelation. Ron has, in effect, introduced a new prophecy that adds to the book of Revelation. Ron Wyatt here is playing a dangerous game. And I quote, I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God shall add to him the plagues which are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of this prophecy, God shall take away his part from the tree of life and from the holy city which are written in this book. Revelation chapter 22, verses 18 to 19. Ron has added words to the prophecy of this book using angelic authority. How can you instantly recognize if someone is a false prophet? If he, by prophetic authority, has added to or subtracted from the book of Revelation, then he must be a false prophet. The reason why is that divine revelation has previously revealed that the canon to the book of Revelation is closed. And that is the end of the matter.
Now, I know everybody wonders about what it is, the mark of the beast. You've heard all kinds of rumors, stories, and all this. I'll tell you quick and simple. If you keep the 10 Commandments that God wrote upon those tables of stone, and about which he says in Psalms 89:34, those of you that are writing down text, you'll want this one. He says, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. He spoke the 10 Commandments from the mountaintop. He wrote them in stone, and he says, nothing will change. Right? If you keep that law, you will receive the seal of God. Soon.
The fake archaeology, the pseudoscience, and the false prophecies are really only the tip of the iceberg. Here is the most dangerous thing Ron Wyatt taught. According to the Gospel of Ron Wyatt, obey the 10 Commandments and you will be saved and sealed. Yes, Wyatt does mention at the end of the video that Jesus died for the sins of mankind by being crucified and his blood dripping on the mercy seat. But he is also clear that the means to be saved is through adherence to the law of Moses. This is the antithesis of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ says that you are saved by grace through faith, not by works and not by the law. Ephesians 2, 8-9, Galatians 3, 1-3. For as it is written, quote, but even though we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we have preached to you, let him be accursed. Ron Wyatt was a false teacher, a false prophet, and he preached a false gospel.
And there will be a set of man-made laws. These man-made laws will require that you break God's 10 Commandments. Christ said to the Pharisees, for it is in vain that they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. If you keep those man-made laws and break God's 10 Commandments, you will receive the mark of the beast.
This is apocalyptic nonsense intended to scare people into becoming legalists and Judaizers. This message is utterly foreign to the historic Christian faith. Okay, at this point I'm going to end the video. The remaining 30 minutes of the video is Ron pleading with people to get saved, Mary Nell playing a lot of churchy piano music, of which probably would violate some copyrights anyway, some boring footage of workers securing tunnel shafts, and spurious artifacts from the Wyatt Archaeological Museum that include a prehistoric stone blade taken out of its archaeological context, a stone plug with no proper archaeological context, petrified wood from so-called Noah's Ark with an unsubstantiated provenance, and the hand bones of a giant sloth that Ron picked up at some fossil show that he's pitched as the hand bones of a giant human being. In conclusion, The only witness to Ron Wyatt's claims to have seen the Ark of the Covenant was Ron Wyatt himself. However, while Ron Wyatt's work on the Ark of the Covenant lacks evidence, that is only the beginning of the issues involved. Wyatt was a habitual liar, as proven by his many broken promises and failed polygraph test, as well as the evidence shown in this video of the forgery of a stone wall. He littered his archaeoevangelism with artifacts that have no context, pseudoscience, false prophecies, and apocalyptic visions. He compromised two essential doctrines of the Christian faith. One, that Christ was fully man, and two, that salvation is by grace through faith and not by adherence to the law, creating a false gospel of legalism and Judaizing. And despite all this, few in Christian leadership are willing, even today, to say anything in opposition to this growing cult.